Chazal teaches how severe is the Aveira of Lashon Hara in the strongest possible words. Tanya Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, Bori Kamad Godel Koach Shel Lashon Hara. Come and see how destructive, how powerful is the sin of Lashon Hara. Minolan, how do we know this? Meraglim, from the Meraglim. Ma motzi shemra al eitzim va'avonim. Just like those people, they brought Lashon Hara about eitzim va'avonim. Kacha motzi shemra al chaveiro al achas kam v'kama. It's a very strange kal v'choyma, because if you look in the Sefer Chavetz Chaim, you won't find anywhere there's an issa to speak Lashon Hara about eitzim va'avonim. Nowhere in the in Chavetz Chaim does it says there's an issa to speak a Lashon Hara about a country. So what was the issa of the Meraglim to speak badly about Eretz Yisrael? True, if you speak Lashon Hara about the owner, you speak about, let's say, somebody who owns a timber factory, and you say that his wood is no good. So that's Lashon Hara about the owner of the factory, not the eitzim. Another question. As we said before, the severity that Chazal speak about Lashon Hara, Gemara says, Maseches Erechin, Amar Rav Chisda Amar Mar Ukva, Kol Masap Lashon Hara, Rui L'Soklo, Be'evin. He should be stoned, should be put to death by stoning. And he goes on to say, Amar Rav Chisda Amar Mar Ukva, Kol Masap Lashon Hara, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says about the person who speaks Lashon Hara, Ein ani v'hu yecholim l'dor ba'olam. Both of us can't live in this world. And of course, the classic Chazal that everybody quotes in Erechim as well, Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael kol masapeh Lashon Hara magdil avoinos keneged shlosha aveiros. We raise up his aveiros as though they were like the three major aveiros of avodah zarah, avodas kechavim, gilui arayos, shvichas damim. Why is Lashon Hara so bad? Why is Lashon Hara so destructive? It's true, lives can be destroyed and are destroyed by Lashon Hara. But murder is certainly much more destructive. How can we compare speaking ill of somebody to murder, to avodas kechavim, to gilui arayos? And certainly the punishment for Lashon Hara is not the same punishment as is for those aveiros. You don't put someone to death for speaking Lashon Hara. So what is this shikul? What is this comparison? How can it be understood? The Nefesh HaChaim says the man was created b'tselem Elokim. And specifically the Nefesh HaChaim says tselem Elokim is that man has an ability to create like Hashem's ability to create. Obviously, it cannot be exactly the same, because Hashem's ability to create is an ability yesh mi'ayin, ex nihilo, something out of nothing. But man has an ability to create like Hashem has an ability to create. And let's try and understand that. The name that we refer to when we speak about Hashem as a creator is the name Elokim. But Tselem Elokim, Davka specifically means that man has the ability to create. When the Kodesh Baruch Hu created the world, he created it ex nihilo, from nothing, yesh me'ayin. But at that point, everything existed as the Ramban explains, the Greeks had a word for it. It was called hiyuli. Hiyuli is a Greek word which means matter unformed, pure, raw matter, and within that matter contains the potential for every single shape, every single existence in the Bria. Hashem took that hiyuli, he took that unformed matter, and with each of the statements with which he created the world, Yehi or, Vayhi or, Hashem created the existences that we recognize to this day. Yehi or, Vayhi or. Let there be light, and there was light. Hashem brings things into creation, yesh miyesh, with dibur, vayomer. This world consists of Hashem's diburim, shehakol niyeh bidvoro. Creation is no more than words, one word after another. The word in Hebrew, davar, means a thing, is very obviously connected to the word dibur. Hashem, so to speak, speaks things into existence. And after that it says, Vaya, and Hashem saw ki tov, that it was good. Vayoma, Vaya. Man's ability to create, says the Nefesh HaChaim, parallels Hashem's in as much as he's able to take what exists, to take the raw existence of material, and to create existences, spiritual existences. And more than that, man has an awesome responsibility. At the end of the creation, it says, Hashem saw that it was tov ma'od. Vayashem ki tov ma'od. The creation was tov ma'od. If you take the word ma'od and rearrange the letters, it spells Adam. Tov Adam. Man, and only man, has been blessed, has been given this awesome responsibility to be able to take the tov of this world and to make it into tov ma'od, to bring what already exists to a state of completion and fruition, to connect it to its higher purpose. And all this is done with the mouth. The pasuk says, Devarai asher samti beficho. Hashem says, the words that I've placed in your mouth. What's placed in our mouth is the power of nothing less than the power of creation itself. And just like murder and Gilui Arayis and Avodah Zarah are distractions of the creation, so Lashon Hara destroys the world. Lashon Hara is so severe because it's something which destroys the world from reaching its fruition. The classic example of Lashon Hara the Torah brings is the Lashon Hara that was spoken by Aaron and Miriam against Moshe Rabbeinu. So severe is the view of the Torah that we have a mitzvah. Zochor, remember what Miriam did. And if you think of that classic case, what I'm saying becomes very clear now. First of all, Miriam had no malice aforethought when she spoke badly about Moshe Rabbeinu. It's her brother who she loved. That Lashon Hara she spoke was a mistake, a misunderstanding of the level of nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Wasn't motivated by evil in any way. And in the very next pasuk it says that Moshe Rabbeinu was Onav Mikol Adam, the humblest of all men, and for sure Moshe Rabbeinu did not resent, did not feel slighted, did not feel in any way damaged or hurt by her Lashon Hara. It wasn't with a negative intent. It didn't hurt the person it was spoken about. And yet, that is the classic case of Lashon Hara. From this, it's very clear that Lashon Hara is destructive, and it's not destructive in the way that we normally think. Of course, I'm not in any way belittling the destructive power of Lashon Hara in relationships between people. As I said at the beginning, how many lives have been blighted and ruined and destroyed by a misplaced word, even a word of truth. But when we look down deep and we see, why is Lashon Hara, why was the Lashon Hara of the spies such a seminal sin that brought the destruction of our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Bati Mikdash? It becomes very clear because the destruction of words is what destroys our connection to Hashem. It destroys our Tselem Elokim. Chavetz Chaim concludes in his introduction that though the Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash Sheni, was destroyed by the sin of Sinas Chinam, the real problem was Lashon Hara. There are two Eivarim, two limbs in the body of a human being, which are described as either being Tov or Ra by the Torah. To the best of my knowledge, there are only two parts of the body, two limbs of the body, which have the adjective Tov or Ra, and they are the eye and the mouth. Ayin Tov, Ayin Ra. Lashon Tov, Lashon Hara. Ayin and Peh. Ayin and Peh. The eye and the mouth. And there are also letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and there are sequential letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Samach, Ayin, Peh. In the first stanza, as Reitowitz mentioned this morning, in Eicha, the author of Eicha formed the poem, liturgical poem, according to the Aleph base, as an acrostic. Each chapter begins with Aleph base Gimel and goes on. But in the second, third, and the fourth chapters, there's a strange reversal. Because if you see there in Eicha, you'll notice that it starts off alphabetically, but when it reaches Ayin, it doesn't go Samach, Ayin, Peh, it goes Samach, Peh, Ayin. The reversal, the letters are reversed. The first letters of each stanza are reversed. And the Gemara comments on this. It says in Maseches Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Dalad Amud Beis, Amar Rava Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Bishvil ma hiktim peh la'ayin. Why in Eicha does the peh appear in front of the ayin? Bishvil hamaraglim sha'omru b'fihem ma shalo rui ro'u be'einehem. That they spoke what they mouth with their mouths, that which they did not see with their eyes. They were maktim peh la'ayin. Let's try and understand this. The Meraglim were faced with a challenge. They were the chiefs, the heads of the tribes, and in the desert they'd all led a supernatural existence. They realized that going into Eretz Israel, things were going to change. They were going to change over from a supernatural existence to something which was going to be much more tachas hateva, natural. Psychologically, subconsciously, this change wore away at their ability to see what was there. They were maktim peh la'ayin. Basically what they did was, if one can use a modern analogy, they wrote the script of Eretz Israel. And then they went in there and they filmed it with their eyes. They were maktim peh la'ayin. So to speak, they had an agenda already. They knew what it was that they thought was going to be there. They wrote the script and then they filmed it. They saw what they wanted to see. They were maktim peh la'ayin. And that, interestingly enough, makes a lot of sense now why we say that the spy spoke Lashon Hara. If you think about it, they really spoke Motzi Shemra. They lied. They lied about the country. They lied about Eretz Israel. Why then was it called Lashon Hara? As we know, the Rambam makes the three divisions of Lashon Hara into three. There's a Rachil, there's somebody who speaks Lashon Hara, and there's Motzi Shemra. A Rachil is like a peddler. Rachil means a peddler. Somebody who loads up his wares from one place and takes them to another place. That's somebody who takes stories which are not necessarily damaging and are true, and he offloads them, he spreads them around. That's what we call gossip. The second level is Lashon Hara, where you're speaking things which are defamatory, which are hurtful, damaging, but they're true. And of course the third level is lies, things which are defamatory and also untrue. The reason why the spies spoke Lashon Hara and not Motzi Shemra is they actually believed what it was that they were saying. They'd written the script, and their eyes confirmed what it was that they'd already said. They were maktim peh la'ayin. As we spoke about in the creation, that the Kodesh Baruch Hu speaks things into existence. Vayoma Hashem yiyor vayior. And Hashem sees, Vayah ha'or ki tov, that there is only one existence who can be maktim peh la'ayin, and that's Hashem. Hashem speaks, Vayhi or, Yehi or, Vayhi or, Vayah Elokim, and that's when Hashem sees. Hashem is the only existence who can speak, who can write Kaviyachol, this film script of life, of existence, and then he sees it. And by seeing, that means he gives kiyum. Hashem gives firm existence to that which he already spoke. Man, and the job of man in this world, is to see what is and to accept it. This is the world that Hashem created. Man has to see, faithfully see, and speak the truth about what he sees. This is the root of all Lashon Hara, that I want things to be a certain way. My job is to be maktim ayin lepeh, to say whatever Hashem has done, that is good. Kol ma da'asa rachmana l'tavahu da'asa. Everything that Hashem does is good. I accept what Hashem has done. Hashem decided to give this person over here a better cop than me, a better head than me. He can run faster than me. He's funnier than me. He's more serious than me. He's richer than me. He's better looking than me. He has a nicer apartment than me. He made better shidduchim than me. That's right. That's the way Hashem wants it. I have to see what exists, and I have to be makabel upon myself. That is the way things are supposed to be. The root of Lashon Hara, says Rav Dessler, is sinas chinam. Sinas chinam is a contradiction in terms. If you hate somebody, then you have a reason to hate them. How can you hate somebody for no reason? If somebody comes, Rahman al-Islam, and kills your family, you have a very good reason to hate them. And if they don't do something bad against you, why should you hate them? And Rav Dessler brings out this exact point. Sinas chinam and Lashon Hara is based on a terrible misunderstanding. A person thinks, you know something, what that guy has over there really should be mine. You know something? Joey over there, Joey's living in my house, that should be my house. And Joey's living to my wife. And you know something? Joey's breathing my air. Because if he wasn't around, that would be mine. That's the fatal error. Because the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, Vayomer Vayar, he says, this is for this one, and this is for this one, and not one person can touch the chelek of his charero, but by a hair's breadth. We're all on our own separate monorail, speeding along at hundreds of miles an hour. And it looks like we could touch that monorail next to us, but if we did, it would be a terrible crash. We're all speeding along, and wherever Hashem put us, that is exactly the way we're supposed to be, where we're supposed to be. Married to who we're supposed to be married to, with the children we're supposed to have, with the intelligence we have, with the abilities and the lackings that we have been precisely engineered. And to think otherwise is to be maktim per la'ayin. I'd like to go on to another subject now. The Rambam, speaking about the fast of Tisha B'Av, records that there are 5 tragedies which took place on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the day when the spies, as we know, brought the Lashon Hara about Eretz Israel back to the people of Israel. It was the day that the 2 Batei Mikdash were destroyed. It was the day that a large city called Beitar, where hundreds and thousands of Jews lived, was destroyed, mercilessly murdered by the Romans. And there was a king there called Bar Koziba, Bar Kochba he's also known as, who were the great ones of the generation, and Rabbi Akiva amongst them believed that he was Mashiach. He was put to death as well. And that ended the hopes of Mashiach in that generation. Now we say, parenthetically, let's be understood, that when we say when Rabbi Akiva understood that Bar Kochba was Mashiach, Rabbi Akiva didn't make a mistake. Rabbi Akiva doesn't make mistakes. It means that Bar Kochba could have been Mashiach. He was Mashiach in everything except that the generation was not worthy for him to appear, to be Nitgaleh. And with the destruction of Beitar, that came to an end. And the destruction was so severe in Beitar that the Gemara says they fertilized the fields with Jewish blood for 7 years. So great was the carnage. And the 5th of the tragedies that happened on Tisha B'Av, says the Rambam, the Turnus Rufus, the evil Harosha, and in the Frankel edition of the Rambam, the new edition, it adds a couple of words there. Mimalche Romi, from the kings of Rome. Charash esa heichel v'svivov. He plowed over the sanctuary and its surroundings to be Makayim what it says in the Navi, Tzion Sadeh Techaresh, that Tzion will be plowed over like a field. This fifth tragedy is not chronological. Beitar happened afterwards. So one has to assume that the list that the Rambam is bringing is not something which is chronological. In fact, what we could assume is that, you know something, what's going on here is we're going down the steps until we finally reach the nadir, the lowest point from which there can be no lower. What is that? The plowing over of the ruin of the Heichal. Now that's a very strange thing. First of all, what's so sad about plowing over a ruin? It's gone. And why should that be the worst? Why should that be the absolute pits of destruction and despair? Why? Why that? And the answer is, I think, a ruin is a very sad thing. But a ruin is also a ground plan. A ruin can be a blueprint. A ruin speaks of what was, but a ruin also tells you what might be again. When you take a ruin and you plow it over, you leave absolutely no vestige, no memory. We sit here on a Tisha B'Av and we try our very best to connect to an event which is almost beyond our comprehension. We dig deep. We try to bring the tears, and they're very difficult to find. Rav Bullman Zatzal once said, we have to cry because we can't cry. And even in a few hundred years, there's a story, well-known story that I heard from Rav Mendel Weinbach, Zeichet Tzaddik Levracha. A famous story about Napoleon who was walking through the streets of Paris on the night of Tisha B'Av, and he hears this terrible wailing coming from the shul. And he sends in his aide-de-camp, his right-hand man, to bring out the president. And he says to the president, what's going on? What happened? Is there some terrible tragedy that happened amongst my subjects, the Jews, that I should know about and of which I was not informed? And he says, Your Majesty, we're crying for the destruction of our temple. He said, this is terrible. I never heard about this. When did this happen? And he said, Your Majesty, it happened 1750 years ago. 1750 years ago. And you can still cry? You're still crying for something that happened 1750 years ago? Said Napoleon, I believe that you'll get it back. If you can cry for something for so long, I believe you'll get it back. But how many of us wail and cry? How many of us understand what it means that the Shekhinah is in Golus? How many of us understand what it is to have lost the Beis HaMikdash, to have lost that contact? And that, gentlemen, is what we should cry for, because you know what the Malchei Romi did, the kings of Rome, and all of their descendants down to this day. They took the Beis HaMikdash and they turned it into a beautiful field. Tzion Sadeh Techaresh. It's a beautiful field. What are you Jews sitting on the floor? Come on, this is the 21st century. Let's get up, let's go down to the beach. Come on, it's the middle of summer. It's gone. Forget about it. And you know how successful they've been. How many of us are sitting on the floor trying to cry on a Tisha B'Av? Look out there, and we've all probably got brothers and sisters and friends and aunts and uncles who have absolutely no idea what we're crying about. So successfully have they plowed over that field. And even us, those of us who've made it here, who've made it to a yeshiva, how difficult it is for us, how connected we still are to all that shtus, how it keeps coming back and playing back in our ears like an unbeckoned song, that siren song, that come and join us on the beach, let's go surfing. So difficult to dig down. And we think, and we remember the tremendous enthusiasm. The first time that a person ever kept Shabbos, you remember the first Shabbos you ever kept. You remember waking up on the Sunday morning and you think it's Monday. You've had an out-of-body experience, something you never experienced in your life. How fantastic. And your first Shabbos at the Kaisel. And the first time that you were in Or Sameach, maybe, and you learned some Mishnah. You learned one line of a Mishnah. And you walked home from the Kaisel, and every shul that you came across, you went into that shul and you opened up the same Gemara. And you read and you learned that Mishnah in every single shul that you came across. And the sheer joy and enthusiasm, his love of escaping. And then you wake up one day and they say a joke, and it's not a funny joke. Every Baal Tshuva wakes up one day to find he's from birth. This is an insult to from birth people and to Baalei Tshuvas as well. Because FFB struggle with the same problems. The problems of things becoming rote, the things becoming jaded, the problem of fighting against a world that is blaring out 24 hours a day, an IMAX broadcast of materialism and go for it, Olam Hazeh. And it gets very difficult to fight. And then edges get knocked off. And they laugh at the Baalei Tshuvas. The Baalei Tshuvas who come and they spend 20 minutes davening. Okay, maybe that's something to talk about. But very often when the edges get knocked off the Baal Tshuva, the center can get knocked out of him too. Where's your Shabbos anymore? The Shabbos that you used to yearn for, long for. The Chofetz Chaim used to sit for an hour or two before Shabbos in his Shabbos clothes, sitting there saying to himself, Shabbos. Where's Shabbos? Now you rush to Mincha. You try and get there on time. You get through the meal. You're tired. The children are misbehaving. Where's Shabbos? Shimshon Pinchas says that in Eicha, he takes the whole of Eicha to pieces and he really presents it as an analysis of what goes on in the neshama of a Yid, or should do on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, it says, a person should feel his mace is mutal lefonov. He has a dead relative lying in front of him. That dead relative, says Rav Shimshon Pinchas, is ourselves. Mace mutal lefonov. Ayeka. Where are we? How low have we sunk? How difficult it is for us to connect. We have to be mitchazek. We have to remember what it was that brought us to an Or Sameach, or to an Eshet Torah, or to any Baal Tshuva, and any from birth person who suddenly wakes up one day and says, I want more. We have to be mitchazek. We have to remember, we have to dig down and take that enthusiasm. Remember what it was like and bring it to life again. Nobody becomes frum just because they want to be another pen pusher, to be an ordinary person. We want and we can have a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a real day by day, hour by hour, minute connection to Hashem. And we know what that feels like. And we have to get the dust of habituation and shake it off. It goes very deep. Rav Sheinberg Zeichet Tzad Livrocha made a l'chaim on the day that he heard about the Dodgers scores and he was no longer particularly interested. Rav Sheinberg was, as a young man, used to play baseball. And he made a l'chaim on the day when he finally heard, he was an old man by that time, that he heard about the results and he couldn't care less. If Rav Sheinberg took all those years not to care about the baseball scores, gentlemen, how much work do we have to do? Where's our Shabbos? And where's our learning? Where's our geschmack in learning? Remember the first time somebody sat down and they explained to you a Gemara and you got what was going on? And that feeling of exaltation. Remember that feeling? Where's it gone? Where's it gone? That's Churban Abayis. That's what we're mourning about today. That's what we've lost. And we are the only ones who can get it back. Where's the hislavus? Where are the ambitions? They say about Rav Chaim Ozer Grzhinsky, that just before his bar mitzvah, there was a terrible fire in the town and he had no time to prepare a drasha for his bar mitzvah. So on his bar mitzvah, he stood up and they said to him, "No, what can you say over to us?" So he says, "I can say over half of Shas." And they said to him, "Which half?" He said, "Whichever half you want." Where's that today? Gentlemen, we can do it. Maybe we won't be Reb Chaim Ozer, but we could be ourselves. We're living in a world which pulls us down, which devalues everything which is sacred and holy, and everything that we came here for, to be holy Jews, to be connected to Hashem, to be balei midas. Wherever our midas gone, wherever our midas gone. Rav Doiv Schwarzman, Zeichet Tzad Livrocha, was the Rosh Hashiva. Rosh Hashiva, in this, he was, as Rav Nota, the Bottle and Chaim Tovim said, that Rav Doiv was the Rosh Hashiva's Rosh Hashiva. Of all of the Bachrim in the whole of Eretz Yisrael and in America, he was chosen. He was chosen to be the husband of the daughter of Rav Aaron Kotler. Rav Aaron Kotler said that he knew Bava Kama better than he did. I'm not going to go into about Rav Doiv because it would go on a long time. Rav Moshe Shapiro was maspid and said there was never anybody like Rav Doiv and there never ever will be anybody like Rav Doiv. I had the stus to be put in his shir. It was a very difficult shir. He used to open his mouth and about 30 seconds later I was completely lost. I used to count the words. Literally 30 seconds. He was a go'in sheba go'in. And I'd been in the shir a couple of days. He came up to me afterwards and he said, "Who's your chavrusa?" I said, "I don't have a chavrusa." He says, "You don't have a chavrusa? I will be your chavrusa." And this go'in oilam used to sit me down after the shir for a half an hour, 45 minutes, and painstakingly, and I'm sure painfully for him, used to reconstruct one tiny little bit of the shir. Ben Adam Lechavero in an Adam Godel whose Torah was so far above me that Ben Adam Lechavero. Rav Pam, let's tell a story about Rav Pam I heard from, I've forgotten his name now. Rav Pam was cleaning out some books. Rav Pam, as you could imagine, used to get many, many Sforim and he used to give Haskamas, and of course, all the Haskamas that he would give, he would get Sforim, and he just didn't have space for all of these books. He called his grandson up, and his grandson, he said, "I want to clear out some of the books. We're going to take the books, we're going to put them downstairs in the basement. Come over on Sunday morning." So he came over on the Sunday morning, the grandson. And the grandson said, well, it'll maybe take 20 minutes to move these books downstairs. He said it ended up taking them nearly 3 hours. Why? Because Rav Pam didn't just take the books and put them in a box. He insisted on opening up every single sefer and learning a line or two from this mechaber. What did this Jew have to say? And when it was difficult and they used to spend time, I understand what he's saying now. And then he would kiss the sefer and put it in a box. That's bein Adam Lechaveru. It's not just loving Torah. You can be mechabed your chaver even if he doesn't know you are mechabed him. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zeichet Tzad Livrocha, there was a young girl who was rapidly approaching 30 and she couldn't find a shidduch. And she begged her father to take her to Rosh Shlomo Zalman for a bracha. To cut a long story short, they finally turned up there on Purim, late in Purim afternoon, and the Suda had already started. And the father went in, left his daughter outside and explained to Shlomo Zalman the situation. And he said, "Where's your daughter?" And he said, she's outside. He said, "Please ask her to go down. You go down with her to the office downstairs. I'll be in there in a second or two." So they go downstairs, Shlomo Zalman comes in, the father tells the story, and he gives her this wonderful bracha. He blesses her that she should find the Zivug B'Korov. They should build a Bais Ne'eman B'Yisrael. Should be full of Torah and Gedula and happiness, and the children should be blessed. They should all work in the way of the Torah. He went, and of course the girl broke down in tears with this wonderful bracha, cried her eyes out. And so Shlomo Zalman turned to the father and said, "I want you to understand now why I didn't invite you into my sitting room. I didn't want her to break down in front of everybody. sensitivity of Gedolei Yisrael. Rav Dessler never slept in a bed during the whole of the war because of what was going on in Europe. And we, in our own way, we walk through the streets, and we're so involved in ourselves and our lives and our Gemara and our Steigen and our wives and our families. A person who smiles, just a smile gives life to people. There are well-known stories of people who've been saved from suicide by somebody smiling at them just on the way when they weren't going to jump off a building. When you smile at somebody, you feed them. The Gemara says you feed them milk, the white of the teeth. My son Shmuli was in the shtibel over here, and he told me this story. It's a lovely story. And he saw there was this old Yerushalmi guy walking around, and he was walking up to each and every person, and then he said Shmuli couldn't actually see what he was saying, but he was bending down, he was whispering in their ears, and he had this old thing, like a plastic thing with a piece of paper, which is probably about 25 years old, and he leans down and whispers in their ears, and they start laughing. So the next guy he bends down, whispers in, and starts laughing. And he finally comes over to Shmuli, and of course he says in Hebrew, he bends down to Shmuli's ear and says, "Do you think you could spare me a smile?" What about our davening? I want to finish with one story. The story which I found absolutely amazing. Story I heard from Rav Rabinovitz from Torah Vadas. Apparently his son had to be taken into hospital Erev Shabbos. They were up somewhere somewhere far away from Brooklyn. Anyway, the hospital was way away from Brooklyn. Got in the car, sped down, got his Shabbos clothes, went to a delicatessen, explained to the guy in the delicatessen, the owner, what he wanted, pack everything up in small boxes for Shabbos by night, Shabbos Suda by day, Shabbos Shudas. And he explains he has to rush because he's got to get to the hospital. And this fellow, the owner of the shop, says, "You've got to daven. Don't forget to daven." He says, "Of course I'll daven." He says, "No, you don't understand what I'm saying." He says, "I was in the concentration camps. And they brought us into the last room, the room before the showers, quote unquote. And we all had to take off our clothes, and they took our clothes away from us. And I saw that the sun was sinking, and I thought to myself, something, I still have time for a last mincha. And I wrapped my arms around me to make a gartel, and I davened the mincha there. And in the middle of that Gehinnom, it was so sweet just to speak to Hashem, to be with Hashem. And I davened, and I don't know how long I davened for. I took 3 steps back, and I realized there was nobody else there. And the Germans came screaming. I said, "What are you doing here? You should be inside." He said, "I don't know." I said, "I don't know." He says, "Get out of here. We get you some clothes. You'll come back tomorrow." That was the last night that particular gas chamber worked. We don't understand what it is when we daven. We don't understand what it is when we do chasadim. We don't understand when we're learning Torah. We have to shake ourselves up. I'll finish with another story. It was a poetry competition in London a few years ago. And the last round of this poetry competition was to read what they call the Lord's Prayer. Psalm 23. Hashem Roi, the Lord is my shepherd. And there was one fellow there, a young guy, who was clearly winning the competition, and he gave his rendition of the Lord's Prayer of Psalm 23, and there was the crowd burst into this tumultuous applause. It was quite clear who'd won the competition. And of course, he was awarded the prize. And just after he'd been awarded the prize, there was this little Jewish fellow. He makes his down to the front of the stage, and he says, "Judges, excuse me, would you mind? I would like to please say the Mizmor LeDavid. Would you mind?" So everybody looks at him. Okay, so he comes up, and in English, very broken English, he says, "Mizmor LeDavid, Hashem Roi." And he says the whole poem. And at the end of the poem, there's complete silence. And then people start to cry. And he says, turns to the judges and he says, thank you very much. And he leaves the auditorium. And the young fellow who won the prize comes out after him. And he says, you take the prize. What have I got the prize for? You take the prize. He says, no. You keep the prize. You did a very good job. You deserve the prize. The young fellow says to him, I just want to ask you one question, Rabbi. Why is it, when I said the poem, when I said the psalm, when I said Mezmor LeDavid, everybody clapped. And when you said it, everybody cried. And he says, the difference is, I know the shepherd. The shepherd is very far away from us. But he's looking after us. He's looking to us. Kadosh Baruch Hu should help that each one of us, Balei Tshuvos, from birth, we should reach down inside ourselves and use this day, as Rabbi Laufer was saying, a time where we can become very close to Hashem, a time where we're going to get up now, that our mace was mutal lefonav, to examine our lives and to feel and to daven and to know that we can do it. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave each of us an awesome power. The power of dibur which is used correctly to encourage people, dibur which is used correctly in tefillah. And use the koiches that we have, and Bezrat Hashem, this will be the last Tisha B'Av that we should be mourning. And next Tisha B'Av, we should all be joined together, arms together, going to the Beis HaMikdash, with that tremendous joy in the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. B'mheira Yomeinu Amen.